So first off, welcome to everyone that's tuned in. There's a lot of news going on at the moment. It seems like there's certain people in politics trying to upstage me on this presentation, but hopefully I won't keep you too long and you can get back to other things. As I mentioned just now, I am recording this webinar, so it'll be made available on our YouTube channel later, so you can go back through things, or if anyone misses it or has to jump out, they can pick it up later. But yeah, let's get going. So a basic outline of what I'm going to be covering today. Well, first off, I was also going to say there are I'm going to be taking questions and things later. If you have questions during the webinar, I'll probably get to them at the end. That'll probably make things easier. But if there's anything I can answer quickly, I will do that. Let me just bring up my chat and the Q&A just so I can see, and I'll set the chat so that everyone has access to that. So yeah, post things in if you want as I'm going. If I can pick them up, I will do. Otherwise, I'll wait till the end where we'll do some more Q&A. So the general schedule of today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Tech4, who we are, what we do. I'm then going to look at the challenges that are facing us in customization and reporting. That's the key thing we're looking at today. What can we do for customization and reporting in ERPx and even in ERP7? After the challenges, we're going to look at a new way of doing things. What are the things that we can do now, which maybe we couldn't do previously? And then finally, I'm going to give you some demos. So we're going to look at our outside the box thinking, which is basically doing customization, doing reporting outside of the ERP product. So first up, who are we? Well, Tech4 Consulting, we provide a range of technical consultancy on ERP, ERP7 and ERPx. We predominantly look at reporting, so things like report engine, extra reports, accelerator, and we also provide training on that and other aspects. So whether that's classroom or remote training, and we provide customization services in both ERP7 and ERPx, and that includes Act customization, so screens, server processes, web services, things like that, and also integrations. So either via server processes or even extension kit, things like that, the newer technologies. We primarily focus on the technical aspects of ERP rather than the standard sort of application consultancy. We look at the actual reporting and customization side of things. And we're Tech4, so there's 4 of us. So the quick little bios of us. Predominantly, we are all ex-Unit4 employees. Some of us were Unit4 employees for a lot longer than others. I was actually the baby of the team. I only worked for them for around 13 years. And that was in the technical areas. So Elizabeth worked in the customization team along with myself. Andy worked in the UK products team and R&D, and we were involved in customer customization and UK products and aspects like that. Along with the actual customization aspects that I mentioned previously, we also offer a number of sort of small products and things as well, and you can get more details of those on our website. We've got things like employee and position data loads for ERP7, a simple multi-factor authentication for Unit4 IDs, and also we're looking to also push out fairly shortly in conjunction with a friend of ours from Logical Endeavors, a reporting expert there. We've created some system access reports for admin and audit purposes. And they'll be rolling out in the next couple of weeks as well. So along with the future stuff that we're doing for ERPx and ERP7, there's also some stuff that is relevant for you if you're in ERP7 now. So that's our team. Let's get straight into what we're here to talk about. So a lot is changing. The ERP or Unit4 ERP landscape has changed dramatically over the past year or so. And there's been a big shift, especially with the introduction of ERPx. And that's changed how ERP is delivered. So what does this look like? Well, ERPx, for instance, is a black box. You can no longer customize that or do the reporting that you used to do in ERP7. Whereas you used to do AG16s, database views, you could customize screens, all of that is gone in ERPx. Mentioning AG16s, the database layer. So even in the managed cloud environment, you are more restricted in your access to the database. And in ERPx, you have no access to the database at all, whether that's for reporting purposes or any other purposes. So those aspects have gone. The tools we use and the tools we've been using for the last 10, 20 years, things like AG16s, things like ACT customization, going back to VB customization, those are now gone. And it's in all likelihood, these things aren't coming back again. So this means there's a dramatic change in what we can now do and what we will be able to do in the future. But this isn't all bad news. In fact, the move to ERPx and the improvements being made to ERP7 are introducing a more modern architecture, more modern technologies that go along with that, and things like a robust and feature-rich API layer. These are all aspects that are coming through in not only ERPx, but in other applications. If you're doing anything with Microsoft, the Microsoft Graph is a all-encompassing API layer that allows you to do various Office tasks without actually logging into the application. So things are dramatically changing, but there's new avenues that are being opened up. So all of this requires us to have a new way of thinking. The ways we previously had to customize and configure the system, as I mentioned, most of those are gone now, and they likely won't be returning. So we won't be able to deliver exact like-for-like functionality during upgrades. If you're moving from ERP7 to ERPx, it's very likely that any customization you have will have to be changed. We won't be able to do like-for-like. So we need to understand what new tools are available to us and where we can deliver functionality, and whether that's in the exact same way as we used to, or using other methods that we may not have thought about before, but are now open to us. So things like where we used to be able to write very efficient, direct SQL queries on processes and reports to handle large volumes of data, we now have to deal with the limitation of getting that data through APIs, because as mentioned before, ERPx is a black box. So we need to rethink how we deliver things like reporting. So whereas previously we might generate all our reports in one go off the back of a server process, now we might look to generate a single report as it's needed in real time, rather than on a process or similar. Where we might create a complex accelerator report to query and post back data, now we might take that data and process it in an external system, or push it back via other means. So writing our own queries, our own postbacks and stuff through the API layer. But understand that as things have changed for us from providing customization, it's also changed for Unit4 as well. They are in a lot of situations in the same situation as us, really. They're new tools that they're building, so Extension Kit and in the forthcoming App Studio, those all allow communication through the API layer. So they have the same limitations on them that we have from a customization and reporting aspect when we're doing that external. So when we previously used to deliver customization, we would always do that within the confines of the ERP product itself. So using tools like AV16s, using Act customization, report engine, things like that. Now that we're doing this on the outside, it does actually have some benefits for us. We can now make use of a far wider range of tools, and many of these tools are industry standard and used by a huge number of organizations beyond the Unit4 ERP customer base. And the quirks and the limitations that we had when we would try and customize screens, if we tried to add extra functionality to an existing top gen screen or add functionality to a server processes or the like, we would often hit upon issues that we had to work around just because of the way the screens worked. Now we're doing customization and these things outside of the product itself. Those limitations or those quirks are gone. So if you want to deliver a new screen, you can build it in exactly the way that you want to build it, and use your data from the API layer and push it back through the API layer. So you have actually far more control. And we're going to see that later as we use tools like .NET Blazor and MAUI to actually design new screens. We can have a look at their functionality. So, I mean, this is a bit of background on what the situation is like at the moment, what that change in attitude is going to have to be, where we're looking to more of the outside. But what I really want to do is go straight into how we can actually start delivering new functionality outside of the product. So this all leads us to our thinking outside of the box strategy. What can we do without doing work directly in the ERP product itself? So I'm going to jump into some demos. But before I start, there's a couple of things I want to note about these demos. First off, I'm running against a ERPx environment here. All of these demos work in ERPx or in ERP7. And when we talk about ERP7, that's either in a managed cloud environment or potentially an on-premise environment. All of these things that I'm going to show you could be made to work in those situations. The reason I've chosen ERPx is because when most people are looking at customization now and what we can do, there's a fear that you can't do anything in ERPx. So I wanted to prove that actually there's a lot of things we can do. So everything you'll see is running against a ERPx environment, our TechForce Developer for You environment. And no ERP setup is required for any of this either. So I haven't had to install DLLs or add configuration into the product itself. As far as installing DLLs are concerned, we can't do that in ERPx anyway. But nothing has been changed within ERP to enable this functionality to work. And finally, you should never do live demos. They often say don't work with children or animals. And if you're a software developer, never do live demos of software because it always goes wrong and it never works. So I'm going to throw caution to the wind and I'm going to do lots of live demos now. So if anything collapses, I guess it's all being recorded, so it'll be out there for prosperity. But let's go straight into it and actually start working on things. As I mentioned before, I'm going to go quite technical on some of these aspects. So if you have questions, drop them into the chat, drop them into the Q&A, but otherwise wait till the end where I'm going to open up Q&As if you need them, and I'll stay for as long or as short as needed for that. So let's get straight into this. So GraphQL is the first thing I want to talk about. And this is going to be the building block on which everything else you'll see in the webinar is constructed. Now, GraphQL was originally developed internally by Facebook as a way of simplifying and reducing the number of calls that they make to their data layer. But it's now an open source project and maintained by the GraphQL Foundation. And we've implemented a full GraphQL wrapper around the Unit4 ERP public APIs to improve their usability for custom querying via external applications and reporting. GraphQL provides a schema definition that defines the data available, and the queries themselves are built using a JSON syntax. If you're not familiar with JSON, if you start doing any work against APIs, you will become intimately familiar with JSON, because that's what's used everywhere. And this provides advanced filtering and sorting capabilities. And all of that is industry standard. It's documented elsewhere. You can go to the GraphQL website to find out those kind of details. But why do we need this if the APIs themselves, the public APIs that are provided by Unit4, have already got the functionality to provide us with the data we need? They've already got OData lookups and things. What's the point in us building this GraphQL layer on the top? Well, let's dive in and let's have a look at some examples of this. If we look at the, and I'm going to bring it up here. So if you've done any work with the Unit4 APIs so far, you've probably looked at the Swagger definitions. And this is the Swagger definitions for our ERPx environment. And let's start with something fairly simple that hopefully everyone should understand the concepts of, and that's attributes and attribute values. So if we look at our Swagger definition, we've got a attributes API, and here we can create new attributes, we can delete them, we can get attributes, we can patch them. And the same goes for attribute values. Now you'll notice with this, when we're getting an attribute value, we have to provide an attribute ID to get a value back. And this will return us various bits of information about that attribute. If we want to get all the attributes, we have to use a different call to get that. And in this instance, we would use the objects API. And in objects, there's lots of other items. And you'll see that if we carry on down to here, there's a attributes API within objects. And here we don't have to give it anything specific, and it will return all of the attributes in one go. So that's two calls. We can either call the main attributes API to get a single attribute, or we can call the object to get multiple ones. Let's have a look at this using GraphQL. So I'm going to show you, this is a GraphQL client, much like Postman. It gives me a few extra features over Postman. In fact, I've got Postman up and running here, and you can see that if we were running a query against our GraphQL thing, there is a specific GraphQL item in Postman. But for our examples, I'm going to use a different GraphQL client. This is called Insomnia. It's an open source client. And this is it. This is our GraphQL query to get attribute information. Now, we have one endpoint for GraphQL, so we don't have to make calls to different locations. There is just a single endpoint, which is our GraphQL area. And we can query this endpoint and get its schema, where we can see the documentation. So if we were to look, for instance, at the Swagger documentation, you will often see, if you want for more information on the data, visit the enterprise document attributes information webpage, and that will give you details of the data involved. This is all built into our GraphQL layer. So I can look at GraphQL and I can say, well, I can query my ERP system, and these are the objects that I've got access to. So I've got access to attributes. And if I drill down into this, I've got my documentation here. And each field has some documentation and provides what it is. So immediately, I've got everything I need in one place. And if I look at this, I can run this query, and let's send this on now. And this is in real time querying that ERPx environment. And you can see I started with a query and I said, use the attributes node and give me the attribute ID and the attribute name. And here's the results. Here's all of the attributes within our ERPx environment. Now, using GraphQL, this has got autocomplete. So I can come in here and I can look for other values. So I can say, bring me a description in as well, and I can reissue this. And I get the description as well. So you're always specifying in GraphQL the exact fields that you want to return, and only getting the data that you actually need. Now, we looked earlier in Swagger that we had a object that returned just an attribute, or the objects which returned all the attributes. Well, here I have access to a parameter on my call, and I can say, well, I want C1 in this instance, and that will just give me a single attribute. So we haven't had to decide which one of those we wanted to call. We've handled all of that behind the scenes in our GraphQL layer. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to the object, whether you're going to the attribute. It doesn't matter. We handle that all for you. In the same way as we've got attributes, of course, within Swagger, we've got access to attribute values. And we've added that in as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste some extra code in here. Just to save when you're watching me type. So here you can see I'm making a query to attributes and I'm making a query to attribute values. And if I run this, I get the attribute details and I get some attribute value detail. Now that's really nice. We've been enabled in one call to query multiple different APIs here. But actually making a separate call to attribute values isn't ideal. Our problem is that within the Swagger definition, the base attribute call within ERP does not provide the attribute values. You always have to make a separate call. In our GraphQL layer, we've actually changed that. So I can take this out, and one of the nodes now available to me in here is attribute values. And within here, I can get the attribute value and its description. And we can request that again. And now I get in one structure an attribute with all of its values. So if I remove this attribute ID, I get all the attributes with all of their attribute values. I haven't had to add a parameter on here because it's getting it from its parent. So again, we are dramatically simplifying the process of querying the standard APIs. Because we understand how the data is structured in ERP, we are able to create our GraphQL layer to run these sorts of queries, to join this information together. And what if we want to go further than this? Let's have a look at the data we've got here. We've got loads of attribute values that come back, but I'm only interested in ones that are sales related. So we can actually begin adding querying on here. So we're going to say, for instance, where the description and contains, and we'll say sales in this instance. So let's do this. And hopefully we've written all that right. So now we're issuing our command again, and now we've got the attributes and only the values that have sales in it. Previously, if you're doing the standard APIs, you'd have to write all that in your OData syntax. Here we've got much better syntax for doing far more advanced queries of this data. And as I mentioned before, all of this is documented. If you look for the GraphQL specifications and documentation, there's a huge amount of information about that. So we can provide not only joining up of these APIs to make them simpler for query, but we can also provide advanced tools on top of that. Now, if we notice these attribute values, there is often a difference between the objects. So if I was to look at the attribute values object, we just get a simple amount of data about the attribute value. But if I look at the main attribute value object, I get additional information like contact points, custom field groups, related values, all of that kind of information is given to you. For this one, I have to specify specific IDs and values and period froms to get this information. But again, we've wrapped all of that into our GraphQL layer. So if I just begin adding on to this, so let's, for instance, say, well, we now want the relation values and the contact points and stuff. We can run this query and we'll get all of that information as well. So again, it doesn't matter to you where this information is coming from, you, where it's coming from, the object or the standard API calls. We're handling all that for you. One of the things you can see with this, we've got our custom field groups in the data being returned, and we've got our contact points. One of our pet peeves when dealing with integrations and reporting and things like that are addresses in ERP. They're always 120 characters. You have to then split them up into 40 character chunks to get individual ones. But of course, the API just provides you with the address string. But again, because we understand the data, we can expand our GraphQL layer. So actually, we can now provide an address line 1 and an address line 2. And if I run the query again, we get the specific address line. So we're able to take that data that is coming back from the APIs and expand upon it. We understand how that data is structured, so we can begin linking all this together. So we therefore take quite a complicated entity, these all these various APIs that you can query, and we join it all into one call with documentation that you can then choose exactly what you want and what you need at that time. So let's go a bit further than this. This is great. We can now query our ERP API layer much more simply. We can specify what data we want when we want it. Let's talk about data from other systems. This is key when we're doing integrations and aspects like that. And it's a really important part of it. And primarily when we're doing integrations, what we're involved with is sending data to an external system or getting data back from another external system. And in ERP, predominantly how we've done this in the past is we write data load tools or AD16s and go in through the web services and drag data in and out. And even with the introduction of ERPx and Extension Kit, this is kind of the accepted way of doing things. You know, we have Extension Kit, which flows in that, which when some data gets entered in an external system, it's pushed into ERPx or ERP7. Or when an event happens in ERP7, it pushes that data through Extension Kit out to another system. That's fine, and that's a valid way of doing things, and will continue that way. But is it always the right way to do things? One of our biggest problems when we do this kind of thing is that we end up with stale data, or the problem of preventing stale data. So regardless of how hard we try, it's very likely that the data between our systems will get out of sync. But now if we have the ability to report externally to ERP, and I'll demo some more of that later, why do we need to store external data in our ERP? Well, let's have a look at another query on here, and I'm going to grab one again. And this is a separate query that gets supplier information. So in this case, I'm going to the supplier APIs, and I'm getting a specific supplier, and I'm getting some information about them. So here we go. Luckily, our supplier name is Tech4. We know who they are, so we've got all the details. But you can see where we get their supplier ID and what's stored in ERPx for them, like addresses and other items. Now you'll notice that this supplier doesn't have a company registration number. What if we wanted to get information like that from an external system? Again, our general accepted way of doing this is Extension Kit. We would load that data in. But what if we could do more than that and in real time? So what we've added to this within exactly the same call is we've added a company's house detail. And if I run this, you'll see that we get the standard information we were getting, but now we get some extra information. We get that whether the company's active or not, the company's name again, their registration number, when they were created. What we've done behind the scenes in GraphQL here is we're querying ERPx, and at the same time, in real time, we're punching out to Company's House, the UK Company's House API, and getting that detail from them. So in normal instances, if you've got a company registration number, we would use that. In this situation, I'm actually looking up the company based on their name and then pulling their details back. So this is live data from Company's House that we can pull back. So this is showing that not only with this GraphQL layer can we query ERP, but we can also build in calls to external systems and call those as well. Now, predominantly we're doing ERP and an external system. In theory, we didn't even need to do ERP. We could build this across other external systems that a client has or that you have. But in this instance, we're bringing together data so we can report on these things in real time. And we don't have to worry about our data being stale or copying it about from system to system, because we can pick it all up as we run it. So we could punch out to Salesforce or you know, a Xero accounting package or anything we wanted to in real time to get this data. So the key takeaways of this really are that we've got one API to cover all our needs now. You don't need to worry about how the data is structured in ERP or which versions of the API you're calling. All of that is being handled seamlessly. And there's no copying data about between systems. In keeping it in sync, we can bring everything in real time. So what can we do with this? Well, now we've got a really powerful layer that can make our lives easier for getting data. So let's start building some external applications that can use this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to here and I'm going to bring up our toolkit. And what you can see is I'm logging in using a Microsoft account here. So this is a custom web application that I've created and which is protected by the Microsoft Identity Platform. So this is going to our Azure AD and I'll sign into this. And here we go. So this is a custom web application running, which is going to demonstrate a couple of technologies. It's using our GraphQL layer that I've just been demonstrating. It's built using .NET Blazor, and we're also using DevExpress, which I'll show you later. So let's have a look. First up, let's have a look at my profile. Now, what this is doing is it's querying our ERP system. So it's gone, okay, you're logged in as Peter Davis from Tech4. I found a ERP user with that domain user access, and I've gone and found their username and their user ID, and I've gone and found which roles and teams they're part of. But equally, I've bought you a nice profile picture. I'm not sure whether it's that nice, but it's a profile picture anyway. And that profile picture has come from the Microsoft Graph. Likewise, I can look at which teams in Microsoft 365 this user is a member of. So again, we're querying ERPx and we're querying the Microsoft Graph all in real time. If we wanted to have a look at what that actually looks like, I can show you this query that it's just run. And I'll paste this in here. And here you go. So we're calling the users API, and we've actually added an additional parameter onto that to be able to look up things via domain users, and we're bringing back a user ID and a username. And also we've added a profile image tag in there, which is this. And this garbage data that you can see here is actually the base 64 encoded picture you've just seen. And that's being brought in from the Microsoft Graph. And equally, we've added user teams. So we've got team names and descriptions. So again, this is data coming from Microsoft Graph in real time. So we're querying across things. let's have a look at our suppliers. So the suppliers that we looked at through GraphQL, I can populate a drop-down with a list of all the suppliers in the system. I can then choose a supplier, and we get a nice dashboard appearing of all this data. Some of the stuff you saw earlier. So we don't have a supplier registration number on this one, but we've brought in our company house details, payment details. These are codes that come back from the supplier API, but we've made separate calls to actually go and get the descriptions for those codes. So you can see all that again in real time. We're querying across multiple things, and we're bringing all of this data back. So invoices, supplier transactions, purchase order details, and it's pretty quick. It works really well. Along with this, you can see we've got contact information, and not only do we have contact information, but we can actually edit this information. So I can add a new line to the addresses, and I can save this. And in real time, behind the scenes, that data is pushed back into ERPx. So we can read from ERPx, we can push data back in. So we can create completely custom screens, all within, all using the data from ERP7 or ERPx. And we can push data in, we can pull data out. Now, I've turned it off in this instance to make things easier, but if we had workflow on that supplier, pushing that address information into ERPx would have actually triggered workflow to process it and send it for authorization and things like that. So we've got all that. Now, why might we want to create a application like this when we've got dashboards and things within ERPx? What's the point of doing all this kind of thing? Well, how about providing an external portal to your suppliers where they can be securely logged in? We can do that with the Microsoft Azure business-to-business connector, where they can log in with their own usernames and be authenticated, and they can potentially see the information that is stored in here. They can update their own information, so they don't need to contact you to say this person's left, we need to change the email address, our address has changed. They can do it all themselves. What about providing a simple cut down portal for contractors to be able to submit timesheets or expenses without giving them access to ERP? So rather than having to give them an ERP login and train them on how to get to the timesheet screen and what timesheet periods to use, what codes to use, and all that kind of thing, we can create a dramatically cut down, simplified screen which just says how many hours have you worked this week, and then we can push that into the system. Simple dashboards for project managers or other staff that are embedded within your own Microsoft Teams sites or your own intranet portal. All of these things without the user ever having to be trained to actually use the ERP system themselves or logging into that. We can do all of this external to the application. So that's really neat. So you're able to deliver simplified, very focused applications. And in this instance, this is a web application running on a standard website. We could have just as easily have created this as a mobile app. There's additional complications on how those data are issued to people, but we can do all that kind of thing. Now, what about external report? I mentioned external reporting earlier. So look here, we've got purchase orders, for instance. If we were sending a purchase order to a customer, in general, we'd first run our P001 process that would generate the purchase order, and probably off the back of that, we would email purchase orders to suppliers. If they then rang us up and said, I didn't get this purchase order, can you send me a copy of it? We'd run a P003 process to do the copy and send that result on to them again. But what if we had a supplier portal like this? and they could just go in here, they could look at their supplier, they could say, oh, I've got these purchase orders open, and I click on a purchase order, and we go and show them the purchase order that applies to, and that's what we've done here. So they don't need to contact you, and you don't need to email them the details. It's all available within their own supplier portal. Now, what have we done here? We grabbed this information from the document archive and pulled it out like that. No, we're generating this purchase order in real time, generating a PDF, which they can then print out, they can download in whatever format they want to. And what we're using to do that is DevExpress. And DevExpress is the tool that Unit4 use to provide extra reports within Report Engine. What if we want to make a change to this? Well, we've got a report editor in here as well. Again, 100% web-based, so we can actually open up our purchase order report that we just displayed then, and this should be fairly familiar to anyone who's done extra reporting. You get access to the data source behind the scenes, so you can see all the information that I've pulled back and the purchase order information, and we can drag those fields on. If I take a field, for instance, the supplier field, and let's look at the appearance of this and say, oh, actually, I want this supplier field to be in red. I can save this, and now let's go back to our supplier screen, find our Tech4 supplier, click on here again, and we'll open this, and we've got our supplier thing. So in real time, we're generating these reports. Now, that won't be applicable to everyone. In realistically, you know, a purchase order copy, you might want to always produce the same copy to people, but you have that flexibility. We have the possibility to do real-time web-based reporting. And when I spoke earlier about, you know, do we do all this on a server process and generate high volumes of reports at the time, or do we just do single hit reports in real time? This is what we were talking about. Think of this as a supplier looking in to see a statement, downloading invoices, even employees logging in and getting their pay slips, rather than those being generated all in one big process. The process still runs to generate the pay slips, but they log in and get their pay slip as and when they actually want it. And in supplier, if we're producing a supplier portal like this again, the supplier no longer has to pick up the phone or email you to say, can I have a copy of my purchase order? They can just log into their portal and they can get it there immediately. So again, this is really neat. Well, I think this is really cool. It opens up a whole range of new options for us now for building external features and functionality. But okay, it's cool. What if we don't care about any of this? What if we are not interested in creating external applications for people to use? We're quite happy with doing everything in ERP, and we're quite happy with using Extension Kit to do our integrations. Well, taking this supplier portal as an example, most of our integrations that we make with other organizations, we're sending or receiving large amounts of data. So for instance, I've done integrations where we're integrating with a external payroll application, and we will have to send employee data. So we'd send data from the resource master file, we'd send employee position data, we'd send expense data, we'd send timesheet data, lots of different data sets all at the same time. So let's have a look and see what this is going to look like in Extension Kit. So I'm going to log into our live ERPx Extension Kit. So let's go into here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that supplier query that generated this screen. So when we look on here, so all of this data, the GraphQL query behind the scenes, if I show you that, looks like this. We can see we get supplier transactions, we get supplier information, we get our company's house information, we get payment methods, we get attribute values. These are to get descriptions for codes that are used, and we get purchase order information. If we want to do that within Extension Kit, it looks something like this. So you can see we've got a webhook, so we could call this. We've then got a HTTP request. This is going to the supplier's object and getting specific bits of data. We're then parsing that so we can use it later. And this is what the GraphQL layer is doing behind the scenes. We get that data, we parse it into an object so we can use it later. So this is very like for like. We then issue another call and we're getting the, in this instance, the supplier transactions. Another call, we're getting payment methods. Another call, we're getting attribute values. Down the end, you can see we're making calls to company's house to look up the company's data. All in all, that creates 14 actions. Now, you might think that, 14 actions, that's not that many really. I'm just going to set this up once and then it's going to be running. So why do I care that there's lots of actions in here? From a developer point of view, I care because it's slightly cumbersome, especially if we want to start making changes in here. But also, what if we've got hundreds of suppliers in the system, and this is something that we need to export multiple times a month or multiple times a week, for instance? Hundreds of suppliers, 14 actions. Our number of actions that we execute through Extension Kit grows dramatically, very quickly. So which isn't ideal. What does that look like then if we call our GraphQL layer from Extension Kit? Well, it looks like this. We have a single call, and we've got our query as part of that call. Now, I realized after I built this probably wasn't that visible, so I created another one with a slightly more better looking call. So you can see here that all you do to make this GraphQL call is you take that GraphQL that you've written in whatever tool you wanted. So I've just taken this code, for instance, and I've put it into the query parameter on the content. So suddenly our Extension Kit call goes from 14 actions here to 2 actions effectively. But it gets better than that. I ran this, so this version of the GraphQL that I'm calling here is running within an Amazon AWS Lambda environment. So it's a serverless environment, and actually, because it's so small and quick running, it's actually running within the free tier of Amazon Lambda. So it's unlikely to actually incur any costs because of the amount of resource it uses. But it's running in Amazon Lambda. I ran the Extension Kit version of this call and our version, both of which behind the scenes make exactly the same number of API calls back to the ERP layer. The 14 call version, the standard, using nothing but standard Extension Kit, took on average about 6.5 to 7 seconds to run, whereas our version calling GraphQL consistently took around 3 seconds to run. So twice as fast as making these calls standard. So in fact, through our GraphQL layer, we can call the standard Unit4 APIs faster than Unit4 can call them via Extension Kit. So not only are you getting a huge reduction in the complexity of your Extension Kit flows, you're also getting a significant speed increase in doing this, along with a vastly simpler way of querying. So we're using this through Extension Kit. You could call it via some other method. You could call it via BizTalk. You could call it through another system. What we're doing is providing a layer on top of the APIs. So all this is showing that you can create very powerful customization entirely outside of the system. And as I showed, this is all running on ERPx. A last thing to note on all this is that one of the things that is always mentioned with customization, and which I would probably say is a bit of a myth, but it's always mentioned, is that, you know, with customizations, it creates an extra burden during upgrades, because you have to now upgrade your customization at the same point. In this situation where we're using the APIs, that is no longer a problem. When the Unit4 application, when ERPx or ERP7 gets upgraded behind the scenes, we don't have to make any changes to what we're doing within our custom web applications or GraphQL layer. If we look at the, let's have a look at the Swagger definition again. This will take it a second to load, but what we'll see is that for APIs, if there are changes made to them, and we can look at, let's look at something like the Object API, if this comes back to life. So here we go. If we look at purchase orders in here, if I can find it. So purchase orders, you'll notice that on this version 1 purchase order calls, there's a object deprecation issue. This is Unit4 saying this object is deprecated, you shouldn't be using it anymore. And what they're saying is move to the version 2. So if we were to go and explore the version 2 aspects, again, within these objects, there's a purchase order. So there's a new one there. But the key factor is the old one hasn't gone away. And because of these API integration kind of things, Unit4 won't take the old stuff away. They just create new versions that you can call. So therefore, any upgrades now become on your own time. If in a managed cloud environment, in ERPx, if things like report engine change, you have to upgrade to the latest versions. If you're doing your reporting and other work outside via the APIs, you no longer have to make changes in exactly the same time scales. You can do them in your own time, and keep things like that. So actually creating customization and the upgrade thing is not a problem with this kind of thing. So we're almost at the end of an hour. I've taken a lot of time, so let's just have a quick look of where we've got up to. So the key points I wanted to make about this are ERPx and ERP7. This will work across all of them. So you can build things now against ERP7 for the future. So you can start moving things external now, making your upgrade paths easier. Using GraphQL means that you have one data endpoint with a fully documented schema, and you're getting boosts to things like Extension Kit and other external integration tools. They can actually function faster. You can create completely custom applications. Your data is in real time, and you're able to do fully web-based reporting. So final thoughts on this. Customizing ERPx and ERP7, as it turns out, it's super easy. It's barely an inconvenience. And if you don't get the reference for this, you can email my colleague Andrew Woodhead. He'll tell you all about this. But yeah, that is it. Are there any questions that anyone has from this whistle-stop tour of how customization and reporting will change in the future? I'm going to stop sharing and I'll have a look. If anyone has a question, wants to raise their hand, they can do. If not, no, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions. Of course, if you do have anything after the fact, as I say, I'm going to post this on our YouTube page, so I'll let everyone have that link who's been on the call, and it'll be posted on our LinkedIn page and stuff as well. And just get in contact us if you want to know any more, and we'll see how we can help you out. So yeah, if there's no questions at all, I will let you all. Oh, there's something from Richard. Demonstrated how you can build web applications against microservices. Is there any way to create a link from ERPx as a menu item to an alternative screen? Probably not easily, not that I'm aware of at the moment, Richard, no. I don't know of any way. I mean, there used to be a concept within forms and things like that where you could actually have links. So it's possible you could link out directly to an external screen if you wanted. It's probably not an ideal use case because you're pushing people outside of the application when they're inside it. I would suggest that these kind of things are more suited for embedding these things in your own internal sites and Teams areas and things like that. So no, at the moment, I don't know any way from ERPx of linking out. But yeah, as Tiago said, you need to open it in a new window and things. So you wouldn't get that kind of seamless integration. Yeah, as Richard said, it's a good idea for an enhancement request. Yeah, exactly. And there might be things like that because, you know, Unit4 are building in their new App Studio, allowing you to create custom screens within, or they're more like additional forms within the application. So there might be something similar you can do then. So we'll wait and see. Okay. Anything else? Doesn't look like there's anyone. Okay. I will let you all have your valuable time back for the rest of the afternoon. And as I say, any further questions, anything else you want to know, just drop us an email. You'll have my link from this call, but yeah, find us on the Tech4 LinkedIn page or on our YouTube page, on our everywhere you can find things. Just drop us a mail and let us know. But other than that, I will shut down the webinar. Thanks very much for joining and listening and spending your time, and I will catch you all later.